In his famous study of the German people following World War II, the American social critic Milton Mayer found that many of the people he interviewed scarcely noticed that their society had been taken over by a brutal totalitarian ruler. They were contented. They went about their lives. They did their work. They did their research. They enjoyed their families. And yes, they noticed that the synagogue had burned down and that their Jewish neighbors had moved away, but they remained silent. Next slide. And life was good. They had a great leader, and the leader had a plan. Everything seemed wonderful. Everything seemed just fine until that horrible war broke out. The title of Milton Mayer's book, as you can see, is They Thought They Were Free. Now, I will not continue with this list of benchmarks of autocratic governance. For the specifics, you can read books on modern political history or consult your local listings. And I will not have time to discuss specific strategies for change. But I'd like to conclude with 2 points of recognition that may be helpful in efforts to restore democracy. Next slide. The first point might be called the Niemöller principle. It stems from the life of Martin Niemöller, a Protestant pastor in Germany who supported Hitler in the early years of the Nazis' rise to power, but later came to see what was going wrong and protested. And he was imprisoned in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Next slide. There's his cell in Sachsenhausen. And after the war, he said this: first they came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I was not a communist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak up. And although Niemöller himself did not state the lesson as a principle, I would summarize it as follows. Next. If you see them doing it to somebody else, don't think they won't do it to you. And this suggests a need to recognize one's connections to the plight of others and one's solidarity with them. Poor Niemöller got the point after he had been shipped off to the concentration camp. By the way, I'm pretty sure his crime was that of Well, once again, it often happens that people watch democracy literally evaporate before their very eyes, and they say, well, that's of no concern to me. I have my work. I have my research. I'm going to get a good job. I'm not involved with all of this. And I believe it was Patrick Henry who once said, give me liberty, or maybe a research center and a few grants. Maybe you don't have that quote exactly right. But even for those of you who simply want to get on with your work and your lives, there's another point of recognition. It's a malady to which even good rulers often fall prey. Next slide. The historian Barbara Tuchman calls it the March of Folly. In her book by that title, she looks at societies that launched catastrophic wars or pursued disastrous policies, tenaciously persisting in them to the bitter end, even when the results were clearly contrary to their self-interest. And she calls this mindset that produces outcomes of this kind, next slide, wooden-headedness. Classic example of wooden-headedness, an example. Thank God we don't have any wars like that now. And if you read the daily paper, the New York Times, or for that matter, the Polytechnic, you'll find ample evidence that the march of folly continues to this day. But fortunately, we are not helpless. Next slide. Barbara Tuchman spells out a suggestion. She writes, if the mind is open enough to perceive that a given policy is harming rather than serving self-interest, and self-confident enough to acknowledge it and wise enough to reverse it, that is the summit of the art of government. How wonderfully sensible. Why not give it a try? Well, I hope this has been an educational experience for you. We've discussed some important concepts: flunky, quisling, stool pigeon, and we've covered some important historical principles. And I want to thank you for participating in this presentation with me, even though, as you probably noticed, we've sometimes stumbled perilously close to the brink of unprofessional conduct. Thank you. Questions? Comments?
What did Tom Paine do?
He was a printer, but he spent most of his working life in unprofessional pursuits. Yeah. Why did the French put him in jail? Well, he was a rabble-rouser, and he always seemed to be contrary to what the ruling authorities wanted.
Right?
Yeah.
It's contrary even to them.
Another, yes.
I just talked to someone, he's against nuclear proliferation, and he went to Iraq as a Geiger counter. And he said that the radiation levels from the bunker busters and the tank busters using nuclear waste tip grenades that I think were developed here in conjunction with the Waterfleet arsenal. He said that the radiation levels in the Fertile Crescent are equal to what a dirty bomb might be. And so I wanted to say I was glad, and maybe you could speak to this. At first you were just talking about fascism and communism, and then you made some allusions to maybe our government. And I wonder if you might want to speak a little further on that by chance?
Well, I would have to have a specific. I mean, I was talking about distant events, obviously, including what's happening with the U.S. government. For those who care about freedom and self-government, we've recently given up habeas corpus. Amendments 1, 4 through 7 are under a cloud. We have warrantless wiretapping, warrantless information search on our email and internet transactions. And it appears that the U.S. Congress, in all of its bravery, is going to ratify this by granting amnesty to the private firms that have been doing this. So I agree with you that there's much out there in our own country that bears close scrutiny. Another comment? Do we have time?
I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you about disenfranchisement, which is what I took the
Yeah.
one of your slides to refer to. And I meant to ask Sue this. Is there any, in terms of the march of progress since the Enlightenment, are there any examples you can think of where the franchise has become narrowed rather than broadened?
Well, of course. I mean, it's often just narrowed totally when democracies collapse and other forms of government take over, right? In the United States, we have problems in our elections where there's kind of seems to be systematic weeding of the voter registration rolls so that certain kinds of people who don't drive SUVs or live in wealthy suburban communities show up to vote and they find their names aren't on the list.